Good morning, Joseph. How are you doing today?
Hey, hi. I'm doing good. Actually, this is Kurt, and I was not Joseph. Unfortunately, I don't have his uh, raspy angel-ish voice. No, that was Roy Sillings. A great actor in Indianapolis.
I got to ask you the question right up from the beginning, because I know how people discover podcasts and they make it a part of their life. We've always known Clarence as being the angel. What is Joseph the angel, so we can get that really clearly put out there for listeners?
Joseph is the angel that sends Clarence down to help George.
Wow.
So there's a whole angel hierarchy going that we're playing with here. So.
The idea for this were you sitting around watching Ted Turner's channel or something like that? I mean, how did this all come together?
My partner, Ray Novoselsky, this is his favorite movie. This basically is kind of the underpinnings of his whole life. It's like how he approaches dealing with people and the world is through this film. Like it's amazing. And he knows everything about this movie. And he's been thinking about doing a project with it and stuff. And we got to talking a couple years ago, and he's like, man, I have this idea for this film or for something. And he's also a documentary producer.
Wow.
And he's also a documentary podcast producer. So he came to me and says, hey, I'm thinking about that It's a Wonderful Life idea. Maybe we could do it as a podcast. And so then we just started, kicking around ideas, and it went from being a podcast about It's a Wonderful Life,
Yeah.
The making of it, or who was in it, or why certain decisions were done certain ways for certain reasons. It rapidly went beyond that to, okay, what does this idea mean for our country, and things like that, right? Things like, who are we, and what does this film reflect America? And it's also about the idea of what impact does any of us have on anyone around us or the world. And it really causes you to have real deep thoughts at 3 a.m. that maybe you don't want to have.
Wow. So did you ever have a moment? Because I talk with many musicians who don't want people to know what a certain song is about. Get your own interpretation. Were you supposed to give us another interpretation? Because, George Bailey, if he were here today, he'd be in jail. The things that he did, he'd be in jail.
That's hilarious that you bring that up, because we deal with that with one of the episodes. One of the interview subjects calls up a district attorney in that area and say, okay, if George Bailey is running a savings and loan and his uncle misplaces $8,000, what would have happened? He'd been in jail.
Yep.
And so it was, we really, think about these kinds of things. And, it's a play on the multiverse idea in a way, right? What would happen if Mary Bailey was the hero? What would happen if, and is Potter the hero? Or, conversely, right? Are we actually living in Pottersville now and not Bedford Falls, right? So, and what happened to Bedford Falls after the movie?
What did happen? There's so many things that these towns that used to be featured in movies are now becoming places for museums. Why is it Seneca, this place where the real, or Bedford Falls would have a museum?
Right, and we talk about that in the movie, or sorry, we talk about that in the podcast series.
Yeah.
And we actually interview a lot of the people who had something to do with the Seneca Falls, the It's a Wonderful Life Museum, Anway Law, Carolyn Grimes,
wow,
who was one of the main, actors in the original film. She played Zuzu. She was instrumental in helping to create the It's a Wonderful Life Museum. And Yeah.
Don't you love the idea that everybody came together on this project? Because in reality, as this generation changes and evolves, this is something that could easily be forgotten within the cracks. But yet, you're putting something out there to re-engage listeners to find out more about this and to put it into their own life.
Exactly. Thank you for thinking about that, because one of our ideas is we were trying to figure out ways to make this film, It's a Wonderful Life, relevant in today's world.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of kids, they're like, I don't watch anything black and white.
Yeah.
So it's kind of up to the parents to show them, like, hey, it may be black and white, but it's still a great movie. And when you see it, it actually does resonate with young people today.
Right.
And because they sense this lack of community, right? Because that's what happens in the movie. You know, everyone comes together to help George and his family. And, you know, that's missing in a lot of our culture today.
So right. And you know what's really fascinating about this, Kurt, is the fact that you have it as a podcast, which is coming through the smartphone. These younger adults find it on the podcast, and right there on their podcast, they can go get it. So, I mean, it's not like, okay, you have to go to a flat screen TV to watch this. You can get it. We're going to talk about it. Now go watch it on your smartphone.
Oh, I know. It's modern technology is both a blessing and a curse, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that exactly everything you just said is exactly true. Modern technology makes it really easy for us to connect if we want to connect. And I think that's part of the issue there.
You know where I really want to watch this movie? I want to put on my Meta goggles, and I want to watch it there because I want to be able to look around and feel like I'm in this movie.
Oh, that would be really interesting. You know, so one of the things that we did was we traveled around the East Coast, talking to people and visiting places that had impact on the final movie. So obviously, Seneca Falls in upstate New York, is everyone really does consider it to be the basis for Bedford Falls. It's got the bridge, it's got the small town, it's got the story, the basic story that someone jumped off a bridge to help somebody. That is a plaque on the bridge, and we have a main part of one of our episodes is about Frank Capra visiting Seneca Falls and seeing the bridge and seeing the plaque, and then talking to some of the local people about the bridge and the plaque and the guy who jumped off the bridge to save somebody and then end up tragically losing his own life, and how that was all interwoven into the storyline. And we also went to a couple places in New Jersey where there's the same kind of bridge, almost exactly the same.
Wow.
And, you know, there's a town called Califon, New Jersey, where the original writer of the short story that the film is based on, story is called The Greatest Gift, was written by Phil Van Doren Stern. And he was a writer and editor in the first half of the century. And he lived in Califon, which is a small town about 40 miles west of New York. And it's a little town, and we talked to his granddaughters, and they're like, look, there's the bridge is there, the church is there, the little town is there. So in some ways, a lot of these small cities in the East they're kind of alike. They're all mill towns. They all have bridges. They all have churches. They all have, and we have gotten our image of small town America out of this movie. Yep. And this movie is made up of numerous people from Nutley, New Jersey, where the screenwriters lived, and they had a sledding hill, and there was a pond at the bottom of the sledding hill where there was ice, and that was written into the movie. And all of these little tidbits of these people's lives ended up in the movie. And that's all of that's where we were back in the 30s and 40s.
I'm so glad that you talked about the fact that this really does represent small town America, because I mean, even in my notes here, I say this represents every city, because at many times when I'm watching this, it could be my hometown of Billings, Montana. There are many, because with the Yellowstone River Bridge, I mean, there's just so many different things in this movie that make you say, this is my town, this is my movie. And I got to be honest with you there, Kurt, is that when I saw George Bailey Was Never Born, I wanted to argue with you. I'm going, the hell, he's been in my life my entire life. He's very much alive.
Exactly. And I'm glad you had that feeling about the title, and that means that there's a personal connection there.
There is.
You would, I mean, George Bailey not being there is like you missing a cousin or something, and it's amazing what kind of impact fictional characters can have on our lives. And that's kind of the basis for the podcast. And can we take those lessons that are in the movie and apply them to ourselves, our town, our culture? Mm-hmm. And we have, in America, we have done that with this movie. Mm-hmm. When you think about how good America is, how we integrate immigrants, how we are always looking to better ourselves, how we are looking to create a community to live in that is honest and hardworking and worthy of fighting World War II over, right? A lot of it comes from this movie. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And not having that, what would that look like? Well, it looks like Pottersville, right?
You got real in this podcast in the way that, and I never even thought about this, but there were people that thought that this movie was attacking bankers.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. We have a whole episode there where we discuss the idea that some people don't like this movie, right, because it's taking on capitalism or capitalists and via the bankers. In fact, Ayn Rand actually had the ear of Joseph McCarthy and a lot of the people involved in the communist witch hunts in the 40s and 50s. And she actually had this film was on the FBI watch list because it was subversive, quote unquote. And so, yeah, the idea that this movie is subversive and and lightly filtered communist propaganda, mm-hmm, is it's odd. So even then, back then, we were divided in a lot of ways as a country. And this film back then saw these issues and was trying to present a world where we rose above that. Mm. And think about it, think about like what would happen if you were not here.
Yeah.
What would your life have turned out? What would your family's lives have turned out like? And we had to think about that, and making this. So, it's like, so what's your favorite scene?
Only because my real name is Clarence. So the introduction of Clarence in my entire life has been based on this Clarence with the bells and things. I mean, because I'm trying to figure out how Clarence seemed to be at peace by being Clarence, and I hated the name Clarence, and I carried that, mm-hmm, negative energy. So when I go in there and I see this, I'm still looking for, why are you okay with it, but I am not okay with it? Hmm. So it's got a deeper thing, and it's all based on his name, and right. so it's like, but at the same time, I'm such a James Stewart fan that there is no human being on this planet that could have played that role except for him.
Oh, no, absolutely, and we talk about that a little bit. We have James Stewart's daughter, yeah, Kelly Stewart Harcourt on, and she talks about that, like who could have played this other than my dad. And she's kind of right. And we look at other Frank Capra films, right? Meet John Doe has a lot of the same themes, and that's not Jimmy Stewart. It doesn't feel the same because it wasn't Jimmy Stewart doing that role, right? And Gary Cooper is an amazing actor, but he's a different actor than Jimmy Stewart. He brings a whole different sensibility. And at the end, on Meet John Doe, he's standing up on a building, ready to throw himself off the building. And it's this kind of the same movie in a weird way. And it's almost like Frank Capra had a trial run first, and he goes, okay, I got some things wrong here. It's a great movie, but let's do some things differently. And so this is kind of like 2.0 version of that kind of idea.
Yeah.
And the original story, The Greatest Gift, was basically Act 3 of the movie.
Whoa.
And that was Philip Van Doornstern wrote it in the late 30s and was trying to sell it as a story, but people didn't think that it would sell right because it was hard to describe exactly what it is. Is it fantasy? Is it a mystery? Is it a drama? Which is kind of the movie, right? Everyone thinks It's a Wonderful Life is a comedy.
Yeah.
We have an episode where we take a look at that. It's actually, no, it's a very dark film noir kind of look at suicide and depression and economic, hardship.
Wow. But you know what, though? I believe that if we would have colorized this movie and placed it in a theater today, it would be called a faith-based movie.
Huh. You're
because look,
sure.
It's about empowerment. It's about lives changing. Yeah. It's about the holiday. It's like this is, and it's absolutely faith-based.
Absolutely, and you can totally see that because Jimmy Stewart is like, I'm not really religious, but please God, and he knows, at the end or throughout the course of the film, religion does play quite a bit in this, I think, where, people's lives are, maybe, are they living the best life they can?
Yeah.
Are they living according to, principles that they really should be? And Jimmy Stewart is kind of the manifestation of that, right? His speeches where he's railing against Potter and where everyone, it's everyone deserves a roof over their heads and that kind of thing. Yeah. Those speeches they're riveting and you get chills, and they are very sermon-like, Yeah. And I totally see that. And that's religion in the best way, right? Mm-hmm. It's religion that speaks to everyone about their better selves and about what we can be.
Yep. Kurt, you got to come back to the show anytime in the future, and whatever project you've got going on, because you dig in deep and you really do become a companion to the listener, and that is so important when it comes to podcasting. It's not always about yucking it up. It's about educating as well as just informing in a way that is just so you can continue the conversation beyond the podcast.
Oh, well, thank you. And that's what we hope. We really hope that when people are driving in their car to visit their relatives or going on a trip, they listen to this and they talk about it after the car, when they're at they're getting dinner, they're at night, they're like, wow, something about the podcast really hit home with you.
Yep.
Or isn't that a weird idea? What do you think? And you start talking about it. So that's the goal, right? Hopefully we get there,
Absolutely. Well, you be brilliant this year. Okay.
All right. And thank you very much. And, take that name. Be the Clarence that you need to be.
Oh God, I'm trying. Okay. Have fun, guy.
All right.